I am Jennifer Wilson, 31 years old. I stand at the Community Foundation luncheon behind the podium as my dad lifts the microphone and praises our family legacy. On my cue, Alicia Park, counsel for the successor trustee, steps forward with sealed envelopes. The house sound carries every word she reads: removal order, account freeze, repayment demanded. Gasps ripple across the room. My mother's smile hardens into something brittle. My brother stares at the table. I do not raise my voice. I lean toward the microphone and say, "Consider this my last contribution. Before I tell you how we got here, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. I see each one. Drop your city or country. And if this kind of revenge story hooks you, subscribe now so you don't miss the next story." I grew up as the reliable one, the person who could be counted on to make other people's plans work. In our house, reliable meant convenient. If a package needed to be picked up before the store closed, I left my homework and ran. If our holiday meal needed extra chairs, I found them, cleaned them, set them, and smiled like it was nothing. I learned to be a buffer between my parents and whatever threatened the image they liked. I translated requests into instructions, and I smoothed over the tone that would have started fights. When an aunt ran late, I called the caterer. When a cousin forgot the gift, I supplied a backup and let him sign the card. Competence replaced affection in our house. If I did it right, there was praise for the result, not warmth for me. Performance was the currency, and I learned to earn it. My mother, Elaine, managed optics. My father, Harold, managed narrative and money. I enforced whatever they needed without asking for anything in return. My value was a simple rule set. Fix problems, do not create new ones, do not need anything. That ended up being my job long before anyone paid me for work. I did not resent it then. I was proud I could make a plan hold. Being useful felt like love, at least in our house. It took years to learn that usefulness is not the same thing as being seen. When the phone rang late, I was the person who picked up and told whoever was crying that it would be fine. I learned which vendor would waive a fee if you sounded calm and which cousin would show up if you used the right joke. My father liked to say I had a head for logistics, which was his way of saying I could carry the part of the load that made his story true. I wore being the buffer like a uniform. It matched every room we entered. I thought that meant I belonged. I started young, earning gold stars for cleaning messes I did not make. In third grade, I stayed after school to organize the art closet because the teacher looked tired. She wrote a glowing note to my parents about initiative. They framed it on the hallway wall next to the family awards. When my brother Michael broke a lamp, I learned to say I bumped the table. Peace came quicker if the blame landed on the person who could absorb it. I became fluent in apology, even when I was the one with bruised shins or a torn page. Saying no was framed as disloyalty. Saying yes bought a few days of quiet. I built a ledger in my head without meaning to. Favors in, obligations out, interest compounded silently. I paid on time because that is what good daughters do. At school, I was the student teachers loved. Notes came home about leadership and grace under pressure. My parents loved those notes like they were proof they had done everything right. They did not ask what it cost to be the child who solved things. They did not see that keeping peace took the space where wanting things should go. I learned to take up less room and to expand only when the room needed me. That is how you grow, when people praise you for what you give, not who you are. I remember my mother handing me a damp dish towel and saying, "You understand how to help," like it was a compliment and a command. In middle school, I walked a neighbor's little boy home when his mother was stuck in traffic. She thanked my parents. My parents thanked me by asking me to do it again the next week. When a teacher split our class into group projects, I was assigned as the leader so the results would be solid. It felt good to be trusted, until I learned that trust also meant I would be blamed if anything slipped. At home, that pattern was the rule. If the house ran smooth, it was because we were a family. If something broke, it was because I was distracted. I apologized on reflex. It saved time. Time became the thing I bargained with, and peace became the prize I bought for the people I loved. The Wilson Family Foundation was the story my parents told the town about us. It had glossy postcards and a tablecloth with our names stitched on the hem. My mother Elaine curated the smile. She knew which angle made her look kind and decisive. My father Harold curated the words. He liked phrases like legacy partner and bridge support. Grants often followed friendships, and friendships often followed visibility. Governance followed convenience. Paperwork was completed in the order that fit the photo schedule. I did the parts that hid the seams. I staffed events for free. I built guest lists, sent reminders, wrote thank you notes. I made silent auction spreadsheets and donation summaries. I learned the timing of a good reveal and the weight of a public nod. The foundation looked generous in a way that covered deficits we never named. Sometimes the deficit was money, sometimes it was attention, sometimes it was ethics. If we named it generosity, no one asked too many questions. People like a family who makes giving look easy. People clap for a story that shines. I learned how to make a story shine even when the numbers behind it needed a different light. The foundation made us look generous in a way that multiplied at holiday dinners and board meetings. If a check went out, there was a photo. If a pledge was made, there was a speech. Elaine kept a binder of talking points with tabs for each donor family. Harold kept a spreadsheet of names and giving levels that he liked to glance at when he shook hands. I knew who needed their name in a program and who preferred a quiet thank you. I knew which local reporter wrote soft profiles and which one asked about governance. We invited the first one to everything. The second one received bland press releases. We called it strategy, the way you call makeup natural after you blend the line between skin and powder. Michael is my younger brother. In our family, he was called entrepreneurial from the first lemonade stand that ran out of lemonade. Every failed try became proof of his daring. When he fell behind on rent, it was called a learning curve. When a credit card balance ballooned, it was called seed money. Debts became investments if you said them with enough faith in his future. My wins did not get new names. If I graduated with honors, that was expected maintenance. If I fixed a problem before anyone noticed, that was just good family culture. I was asked to understand him. He was never asked to understand me. I love him. Love is not the same thing as fairness. The love survived what the fairness did not. I kept showing up with tools and lists while he showed up with ideas and a grin. He grew used to landing on cushions I laid out. I grew used to being the cushion. It is hard to explain a bruise that comes from catching someone else. When Michael forgot deadlines, there was a family text thread about how creative people work best under pressure. When he missed a payment, there was a story about a client who promised to pay next week. Next week arrived so often it felt like a holiday we observed in our house alone. I covered gaps because the gaps looked small in the moment. They added up in my notebook. Michael never asked to see that notebook. He thanked me in the way you thank the air for being there when you breathe. It is not unkind. It is unexamined. No one asked him to examine it because examination would mean seeing the cushion and asking who stitched it. I learned to measure help in inches and then in miles. Every mile I covered quietly turned into the new starting line. By the time I noticed, I was running a race no one else had trained for. I keep records the way some people keep diaries. It started as a habit and became a quiet form of power. I save receipts, emails, and calendar invites. I take photos of checks before I hand them over. I write the date, time, and who said what in a small black notebook. I keep a second notebook that lists who owes what and why. I do not announce it. I do not threaten anyone with what I know. I CC myself when I send sensitive notes and I blind copy a folder I call Future Me. I label threads by risk and keep the labels boring so no one looks twice. My notebooks carry initials in the margin when a person speaks for someone else. They carry stars next to promises and question marks next to pressure. The ledger is not revenge. It is insurance. It keeps me honest with myself. It lets me see patterns that someone else might call accidents. I learned early that memory bends around guilt. Paper does not bend unless you fold it. I learned to forward myself copies of messages before people deleted threads in a fit of regret. I saved voicemails as audio files and backed them up. I printed calendar invites when a meeting mattered to money. When someone spoke off the record, I wrote the record anyway and marked the page with a small dot. My records were neat but not pretty. They looked like a construction site before the walls go up. I could point to a date and a sentence and know exactly where I stood. I did not need anyone else to agree for the truth to hold. I kept copies of board packets and circled the places where approvals looked thin. I learned which banks stamped incoming wires with the clearest memo lines. I asked simple questions in emails so the answers would exist in writing. When someone said, "You know what we mean," I replied, "Please confirm," and filed their confirmation. My ledger was a map of promises and a map of exits in case a room caught fire. It did not make me cynical. It made me calm. I knew I could prove what happened even if no one wanted to remember it that way. My Aunt Lorraine Pierce is my mother's sister. She is warm, quick, and always one story away from the next need. Her bridge loans came from restricted funds with the promise that she would pay them back when her client paid her. Sometimes the client did not pay. Sometimes she forgot the date. Sometimes the paper trail was a handwritten note that went missing after a move. Her son Rick liked to call himself a builder of things. He ran a small event company that needed deposits often and refunds rarely. Several of his invoices were approved as program expenses when they were really favors. Approval thresholds mattered in theory. In practice, a lot of numbers came in just under the mark that needed a board vote. Compliance lived on brochures. In the ledger it looked decorative. Each exception made the next one easier to explain. I noticed the rhythm, a need, a call, a promise, a vague memo, a gap. I did not confront it. I wrote dates, amounts, and names in my notebook and waited. Lorraine called what she needed a bridge, but the bridge never seemed to reach a shore. Sometimes she cried on the phone, and my mother would rub her forehead and mouth the word again at me. I made tea and brought a notepad. Rick arrived late to events with a grin and an invoice. He always had a reason the deposit could not wait. Often the amount settled just under the level that required a board vote, which kept awkward questions off the minutes. Later, if anyone asked about deliverables, he said the value was exposure or goodwill. Goodwill is the kind of word that hides a drain. I watched numbers vanish into it and wrote them down. The paper that did exist had soft edges like it had been folded and unfolded many times. Signatures wandered across lines. Dates were corrected with a different pen. I took photos before the pages disappeared back into purses and glove boxes. The mortgage was the last big ask. The number was $82,000, presented as a family emergency and a chance to keep the house whole. My father said the timing was tight because of a remortgage plan that fell through. My mother added that I was so good with money and so independent. They said they would remember it later. They did not define later. They did not write it down. I did the math in my head the way I always do. I weighed the interest against my peace of mind. I thought paying would buy quiet and maybe a better seat at the table we all smiled around. I wired the money from my savings with a note in the memo line. For mortgage principal per discussion, I saved the confirmation and the follow-up text my father sent. It said, "You saved the house." I printed that text and slid it into a plastic sleeve behind a tab marked home. The thank you dinner that followed felt like a receipt being torn in half. They toasted our family resourcefulness and called me steady. They did not say what steady cost me. I did not ask. I did not want to be the one who put a price on love. I did not know it then, but the clock started with that transfer. The countdown was not for repayment. It was for clarity. The ask for the mortgage came with the tone my parents used for family emergencies. They talked about the home like it was a person who could be saved if someone acted brave. They said we would talk about the future later, when things calmed down. Later is a word that can stretch into forever if you let it. I did not ask for a written note because asking makes people with power decide you are difficult. I wired the money and told myself it was my choice, and in a way it was. It was also the price of keeping the story of us standing. I kept the screenshot of the bank confirmation and backed it up in 3 places. I knew from experience that the things people remember are not always the things they said. Harold called it keeping the family home whole, like the house was a person on a stretcher, and only I had the blood type. He came to my apartment with a folder he did not open and a voice that hurried past details. Elaine stood behind him and told me I was good with money, the way a person praises a fire extinguisher for being close to the stove. They said a new mortgage plan had fallen through. They said the bank needed the wire by Friday. They said I understood how these things worked because I was practical. I set tea on the table, opened my laptop, and asked for the account number. Elaine started to talk about paint colors in their hallway, which is what she does when she wants a talk to feel warm instead of exact. I kept my fingers still. Account number, I said again. Harold looked at his phone and read the digits. I asked for the exact balance. He said, around 80,000. I did not type. He checked again. 82 and change. I wrote the number in my notebook, underlined it, and asked for a payoff letter. He said the bank would send one later. I asked him to text me a sentence that said I would cover the principal as discussed. He smiled like I was being cute and said a handshake was enough. I smiled back and said, I like to be precise. He sent the text. I saved it. The next morning I wired the money. In the memo line I typed, for mortgage principal per discussion on Tuesday. I waited for the bank to confirm, then printed the message and slid 2 copies behind the tab in my binder labeled home. I did not announce that I had done this. Gratitude arrived by text. Harold wrote, "You saved the house," with a row of red hearts that looked like confetti. Elaine called and cried for 2 minutes and told me I was steady and strong. I thanked them both and made no requests. I wanted clean lines. I wanted to see what people did when they thought there was no bill to pay. By late afternoon, the tone shifted. Harold asked if I could call a contractor about the gutters because he was tied up, and Elaine asked if I could come early on the banquet night to help place centerpieces. The ask curled into a new shape. The money was not a gift I had given. It was a reason to give more. I said yes to the contractor and yes to the centerpieces, and I wrote both down. I knew I would need the order of events later, if only to keep myself honest about how fast the thanks turned into new tasks. Silence is easy to misremember, paper is not. After the transfer, talk about the will drifted into rooms like a scent that clings to clothes. Harold said, "We will remember this," as if repeating it made it true. He liked grand words. Legacy, provision, the next generation. None of it came with pen on paper. I asked for a brief note, something that said the amount and their intent, even if it was simple. Elaine looked hurt, like I had accused her of theft. "Do you think we would forget our own daughter?" she asked. The answer in my head was that forgetting did not look like forgetting. It looked like moving promises into a fog where no one could grab them. So I stopped asking for a note and started collecting every mention that landed in text or email by chance. When Harold sent a group message about family planning and wrote, "We are making sure our children are taken care of," I saved a copy. When Elaine replied to a cousin and wrote, "We are so grateful to Jennifer for the help on the house, of course we will honor that," I saved that too. None of it was binding, all of it was useful. The paper trail I wanted did not exist. The paper trail I could build did. Anytime I asked a question that required a number, the conversation slid sideways. "Do you not trust us?" Elaine would say. "We have always done right by our family." Trust is a fine word with a long shadow. It can mean belief. It can also mean silence. I let the question pass and asked smaller questions the bank would answer. I requested a statement with the new balance and the stamped receipt that showed the wire landing. I asked for an updated payment schedule because a plan is not a plan until numbers sit still. When the statement came, I printed it and tucked it behind the payoff note I still had not seen. I forwarded myself the text where Harold wrote, "We will remember this in the will," and tagged it with a date and a star. Stars in my system mean they will forget. At dinner, when I gently asked for a simple letter to confirm their intent, Harold called me transactional. I smiled and refilled water. People who owe you like to say you care too much about details. Details are where debts live. I did not raise my voice. I raised my file count. The hotel ballroom glowed with soft lights that made the donor wall sparkle. The program looped photos of past grants between slides that thanked partners. I handled early arrivals because I always did. When the final seating chart came out, my name sat at the edge table near the exit. It was the kind of placement you give to a helpful vendor, not a daughter. Michael had the head table seat, flanked by Aunt Lorraine and Rick, both already posing for photos as if their chairs came with titles. My name on the program was misspelled. I circled it with a pen and did not ask for a fix. I wanted to remember how small a name can look when a family wants your hands, not your face. I stood at the back near the sound table and watched the stage. The script listed our children as honorees. Under the names, there was a line that thanked unnamed silent supporters. It was accurate and insulting at the same time. I loaded place cards onto tables with the caterer and fixed the ones that curled at the edge. I marked the moment the photographer asked me to step out of a shot so she could get the core family in the frame. I stepped out. I wrote down the time, 8:13 in the evening. Symbols have a way of stacking until they build a wall you can lean on. The wall held that night. The flowers were pale pink and white, soft enough to look like affection on camera. The speeches were printed on cream paper and tucked under the microphone so no one would forget their best lines. I watched the guests who dressed to be seen and the guests who dressed to belong. I checked the house sound with the technician and learned where the microphone feed met the recording device. I smiled when someone thanked me for helping out, the way you thank a stagehand for moving a chair on time. I watched Michael rehearse his grin in a mirror and tuck his shirt like he was about to accept an award. I watched Lorraine and Rick test their laughs and their angles. I took notes on a card the hotel left on the table. Later, I taped that card into my notebook. The hotel logo made the memory look official. The night turned into a string of small cuts that felt planned even if they were not. Elaine joked at our table that I was married to spreadsheets. People laughed like the joke was kind. Harold bragged at the bar about mentoring real risk takers, and he looked toward Michael when he said it. A cousin toasted my reliability like it was a family trait you inherit along with eye color. A donor told me I was lucky to have no children because it meant more freedom, as if my time was a public pool anyone could swim in. I nodded and said, "Enjoy the program," and moved on. I observed more than I felt. That helped. When someone asked me if I would ever settle down, they meant if I would ever stop being the person who fixed things for free. I said I was settled in my work and I liked my life. They tilted their head like pity was the correct answer. Pity can look like concern. It can also look like a discount. I refused it. I turned pity into data and set it on a shelf where I could study it later. Michael brushed past me with a smile that asked me to be happy for him without saying why. He has that open, eager face that people trust at first sight. He whispered that he might be getting a bigger role in the family foundation soon, and he winked in a way that told me he knew something I did not. Aunt Lorraine squeezed my hand and said, "You are such a rock," which is what people say to the person they plan to lean on again. Rick bumped fists with a donor and thanked him for believing in local builders, as if belief paid invoices that never came. The dessert was sweet and heavy. The praise was too. These were not crimes. These were clues. A person can bleed out from 1,000 small cuts if they never bind a single one. I let the cuts land and did not show the sting. I wrote notes under the table about who said what and how loudly they said it. I marked when the camera turned toward me and when it turned away. The room felt warm and damp. The smiles felt like damp towels. I wanted a dry place to stand. I found it in my own stillness. In the weeks before the banquet, hints about the will came with the morning coffee. Harold would say, "We are updating our affairs," in a tone that asked for praise. He had me proofread a letter to a friend and slid in a sentence about how responsible planning meant taking care of those with growing families. Elaine patted my hand and said, "You know how it is. It is practical." Practical was the word they used when they wanted me to accept a cut as a choice. If I asked a neutral question, the air froze. "Do you not trust us?" Elaine asked once, and the word trust did a strange thing in the room. It grew teeth. I kept my replies simple. I trust what I can read, I said, and smiled like it was a joke. Harold tested lines the way a comedian tests a routine in small rooms before a big show. Kids need it more than singles, he tried. We have invested in you already, and it is Michael's turn, he tried next. You are so independent, he said, as if independence is an income stream that replaces fairness. I marked who picked up his lines and repeated them back to me at brunch. A pattern formed. People like policies that reward the stories they live in. If you tell yourself you are the brave one, you want a will that pays courage in cash. Rumor ran ahead of policy. A cousin hinted that big changes were coming. A donor told me he had heard the family was getting smart about legacy. Elaine said, "Do not make this emotional," when I asked how they defined smart. That was the game. If I felt something, I was wrong. If I asked for numbers, I was cold. If I stayed quiet, they called me gracious. I chose quiet, but not the kind they meant. I chose the kind that holds a plan. I wrote 3 texts I did not send. The first said, "If you plan to write me out, say it to my face, not as a toast." The second said, "Put the mortgage promise in writing today." The third said, "I will not be at the banquet." I deleted each one and felt the thin, fast feeling in my chest settle into something heavier and more useful. Then I opened my notebook and made a list of what I could control. Money, records, timing, sound. I could not control their beliefs. I could control what the room heard when those beliefs met facts. I scripted a confrontation in my head and then set it aside. I pictured standing in the kitchen and saying, "You are cutting me out to reward dependence and punish reliability." I pictured Elaine crying and Harold going quiet and Michael saying he did not ask for this, and cousins walking in at the worst moment. I pictured the mess and the photos of the mess that would circle our family the next day. I pictured myself exhausted and blamed. Then I pictured something else. I pictured a room where their words would be measured against rules they could not bend. I pictured a microphone that did not belong to them. I pictured a paper with a seal that did not care who smiled. I decided the venue would be theirs, not mine. If I chose the place, it would look like I staged a fight. If I used their place, it would look like the truth had arrived on its own. I listed the tools I would need: a record of the ask, a record of the transfer, a record of the will talk, a copy of the trust I had never read, which I would find. People in roles who had no reason to fear my parents. People who cared more about rules than about family spin. I drew a square around the date of the donor appreciation luncheon and wrote a single word beside it: sound. The ballroom light made everything look warmer than it was. Glasses chimed. The music faded. Harold lifted the microphone like it had waited for his hand all night and began the story he always tells about building from nothing. People leaned in. "Our children," he said, and paused for applause that came on cue. I sat 2 tables back, straight in my chair, hands around a cool water glass that kept my pulse steady. He named Michael first, listing dreams and second chances like medals. Then he said my name with the same warmth he uses when thanking a caterer. He smiled toward me and lowered his eyes to the cream page under the microphone. "We have updated our will," he said, voice calm, pleased with itself. "Legacy follows need. A good father adapts. Jennifer is childless and comfortable, and so, going forward, she will not be included in our estate plan." The word comfortable landed like a verdict, as if comfort were a crime that canceled history. A few tight laughs, one bright wow. The sound system breathed and settled. I watched the tremor in Harold's hand as he adjusted the mic and logged it. The photographer lifted her camera and clicked, ready for whatever expression this would put on my face. I inhaled once and let the breath go slow. I did not offer a face to read. He went on about rewarding young families and glanced at Michael's place setting where a second dessert waited. He said I would understand because I always understood. The room approved. Approval felt like warm air blown against a bruise. It smoothed nothing. I straightened the place card in front of me and aligned it with the table's edge. Stillness made a shape around me. Inside that shape, I set a single instruction: remember this exact moment. I looked at the red lights on the camera rig. They glowed like small, patient eyes. He closed with a line about legacy. Applause lifted again, easy and thoughtless. I let the clapping wash past me the way you let a wave run to shore without moving your feet. My feet were rooted, my breath was measured, my memory was exact. Elaine's nod sealed it. Small, precise, public. She angled her face to catch the light and shaped a careful smile. The nod said, "We talked about this." The nod said, "It is settled." People near the head table watched her the way birds watch wind, gauging direction. They relaxed, permission granted. A cousin clinked a glass and called my parents practical. A donor on my left whispered, "Makes sense," and patted my arm like I had been given a prize I would never spend. Michael did not speak. He spread his napkin, smiled with the corners of his mouth, and tried to look gentle. His eyes did the math, more for him, fewer questions later. He did not search for my face. He looked at the stage. Lorraine leaned toward Rick and whispered. They shared a grin that counted things. Their phones lit up as they typed, hungry to frame the news for whoever was not in the room. I watched the cool light on their screens reflect in the silverware and travel in a thin blue line across their cheeks. The laughter thinned and settled into a low hum of forks and quiet comments. People returned to dessert as if sugar could make a sentence taste better. The band played a cheerful tune like a hand on an uneasy shoulder. I measured who looked away and who met my eyes. Some held my gaze a second too long, sorry without action. Others smiled brightly, eager not to be part of a problem. I did not glare. I did not ask for comfort. I was already collecting witnesses, the ones who cheer, the ones who wince, and the ones who remember dates. Elaine reached for Harold's arm and squeezed it the way hosts do when a show hits its mark. Their smiles matched. Their story was intact. I watched their story and wrote a new one in my head, line by line, made of dates and signatures instead of nods. I did not flinch. I did not stand. I did not let the blood rush to my face. I lifted my water and set it down without a click. My hands were steady. I let my shoulders find the line my ballet teacher insisted on: tall through the crown of the head, weight through the heels, breath wide. I memorized the timestamp on the camera rig when the operator shifted. 8:52. I repeated the number until it stuck. I slid my phone from my purse, opened a blank text to myself, and typed, "Harold Public will cut." Elaine assent, laughter present. Then I locked my phone and set it face down. I thanked the server when he poured coffee and asked his name again to be sure. I said it back to him and watched his eyes soften. People remember when you use their name in rooms that do not see them. I did not touch my dessert. Leaving the table would have given them a different story to tell, the sensitive daughter storming out. I left them nothing but my profile in soft light and the angle of a person who is listening. In my lap, my fingers pressed and released like a pianist warming up off stage. I thought about the wire transfer and the line of digits that had kept their house standing. I pictured the memo line I had typed and the stamped confirmation I had printed. I pictured the words they used for me, steady, practical, as if they were payment. On my place card, I drew a small square and a circle inside it. The square meant the room, the circle meant me. I marked a notch on the square where the microphone cable fed toward the recorder the house sound tech had placed beside the stage. That notch was the opening. I looked once at my mother laughing with a donor, once at my father owning the stage with his chin, once at Michael already speaking about next steps. Then I looked at the clock again, 8:56. I waited for the speeches to end. I applauded when I should. I added no words to the night. When the applause rose, I stood. I used the noise to fold my napkin and set it to the left of my plate. I slipped past chairs, squeezed a hand here and there as if I were only going for air. In the hallway, I found the caterer and told her the pacing had been perfect. I tucked a tip into her palm because I meant it. People who do their job well deserve to be paid. At the coat check, I asked for my wrap. Outside, the night air was cool and exact. I stood by the curb and let the damp slip over my face. My phone buzzed with nothing I needed. In the car, I opened the glove box and pulled out a folder labeled in my handwriting. If when. Inside sat copies of the mortgage confirmation, printed texts, a list of names, and a clean page waiting for the next move. I wrote the date. I wrote, "Plan begins." Then I scrolled to 3 contacts I had already chosen: a trust and estates attorney, a forensic accountant, and a corporate trustee representative. I scheduled 3 calls for the next week. I did not cry. I did not talk to the dashboard like a person in a sad film. I drove home with the radio off so I could hear the plain sound of the engine and the tires. My hands did not shake. At a red light, I added one more line to the clean page: use their stage. When I reached my building, I watched the streetlight carve a bright oval on the asphalt. I thought about what silence can do if you hold it like a blade instead of a blanket. I decided to use mine. I set the folder on my desk. The trap did not spring that night. It began its slow, clean build. I did not waste breath on scenes. I spent it on records. From the night of the toast forward, I gave myself one rule: no debates, only proof. I bought the full video file from the photographer and watched it once to confirm the house microphone caught every word. It did. I wrote down the exact time when my father said updated our will, and the exact time he said childless and comfortable. I exported the clip and ordered a certified transcript, then logged the receipt number in my notebook. I wanted a certified paper trail that could stand on its own. I opened my binder and laid out the bank confirmations in a straight line. I printed the wire receipt for the $82,000. I printed the text where my father wrote, "You saved the house." I printed screenshots of every message where my parents promised they would remember the help later. None of those messages were binding, but together they built the picture of reliance. I created an index of exhibits with simple names: mortgage wire, thanks text, will hints, banquet transcript, family promises. I added notes from memory, but I labeled them as notes. I refused to make feelings look like facts. Facts live fine on their own. I kept the entries short: date, action, who present, outcome. I did not ask anyone for new promises. I did not demand meetings. I converted anger into page numbers and placed small sticky flags so a hand could turn to the right tab without thinking. It felt like building a narrow bridge over water that once pulled me under. Every page I added made the crossing quiet and safe. I like to know what I do not know, so I hired people who know it well. I looked for a forensic accountant who had worked with small foundations and who did not share a golf course or a church pew with my father. His name was Devin Hale. We met in a quiet coffee shop where no one knew my face. He listened more than he spoke. He asked for documents before he offered opinions. Good sign. I slid a thin folder across the table. He read for 20 minutes. When he finished, he asked only for scope, timing, and deliverables. I asked him to sign a non-disclosure agreement in plain language. He would keep my name and my family out of his stories. He signed, then explained how he would test the flows. He would request bank statements, copies of checks, deposit slips, and the letters that went with grants. He would match payments against the trust document and the foundation's public filings. He would track money that called itself one thing and acted like another. He would place my aunt's bridge loans on a timeline and look for missing terms and for repayment. Then I met with a trust and estates attorney named Nora Whitaker. Her office was orderly without being cold. She handled families who loved their legends more than their rules. She read my packet and asked about my goals. I told her I did not want a fight that burned the town down. I wanted a correction with teeth. If there was breach, I wanted removal and a corporate trustee to step in as the document allowed. Nora nodded and said, "We will build for that and only that. No speeches. Only steps." Devin began with a neat request list and a calm voice. He wanted bank statements for the trust, the foundation, and any account that touched either. He asked for copies of canceled checks and for email threads where money and reasons met. I gave him what I had and signed letters that allowed him to ask custodians for the rest. He set up a secure folder for files. I uploaded the mortgage wire, the dates of my aunt's loans, and notes about my cousin's invoices that always landed just under approval thresholds. He built a spreadsheet that read like a map. It showed dates, amounts, labels, and who approved what. He circled clusters where program expense covered favors. He listed recipients who were related to us or close enough to count. He did not imply, he counted. When a payment could be innocent, he wrote that in the margin. When it could not be, he highlighted it and linked it to the rule it broke. He cared less about drama and more about the line from a number to a name. Pictures appeared in the numbers. There was a line of payments to my aunt that never returned. There was a trail from the trust to my cousin's company that bent around approval rules. There was a payment for my brother's rent that wore the costume of community outreach. Devin stacked the proof without color and without heat. When he presented his first draft of findings, he spoke the way a surgeon speaks before an operation. Frank, precise, steady. The result was not gossip. It was a list of facts that would hold in any room. Nora took the trust apart like a careful mechanic. The language was tidy. It had been drafted years ago by a lawyer who liked clean lines. My father had loved the title of trustee and ignored the duties. A clause near the back named a corporate successor trustee if there was breach or incapacity. The clause did not require a courtroom if the facts were plain. It allowed the corporate trustee to step in, suspend distributions, and compel an accounting. It also allowed the trustee to seek repayment without waiting for anyone to grant grace. We reviewed my father's recent slips. He repeated numbers in meetings and mixed up dates on letters. I had notes where he said one figure in public and a different figure behind closed doors. Nora refused to stretch the word incapacity past what was fair. We did not need it. The breach path was clean if Devin's maps held. Still, she gathered quiet statements that described confusion, hesitations, and corrections. She did not frame them as insults. She framed them as context, in case the board asked why decisions had started to wobble. Nora wrote a plain language memo that laid out the clause, the triggers, and the steps that would follow. She kept her sentences short. She attached a one-page list of exhibits with simple labels. A board member or a donor could read it once and understand. When I set the memo down, I did not feel triumph. I felt steady. The clause had been waiting like a locked door with a key taped to the frame. We were only the people who found it and used it. I turned my living room into a quiet command center. On the coffee table, I set stacks by topic with a small card at the front of each stack that named the contents. A for mortgage, B for banquet, C for aunt and cousin, D for board minutes, E for bank statements. I preserved the digital originals and did not forward emails in ways that changed headers. If I needed to share, I downloaded a copy and placed it in a folder with the date in the title. I kept a log of who touched what and when. I reached out to a friend who serves on a small nonprofit board and asked for a model set of minutes. Then I studied our foundation minutes and marked places where approvals were thin, post-dated, or missing. I did not criticize the people who took notes. I only noted what a reader would see. I requested agendas from the past year and saved messages that said, "We will ratify next time." Ratify next time is a fog that hides a lot of shortcuts. The fog looked thick. For every claim I planned to make, I put the proof within one turn of a page. I did not want anyone to dig. I made one binder, one thumb drive, and one secure link. If a person did not like paper, they could click. If a person did not trust links, they could hold the binder. I wanted the truth to be easy to accept and hard to deny. In the back pocket, I placed a single sheet with 3 lines. What happened, what clause applies, what happens next. Nora and Devin joined me at my table with pens and quiet minds. We took each rule from the trust and placed the facts under it like a test. The trust said no loans from restricted assets to insiders without formal approval and documented terms. We had a string of payments to my aunt with no schedule and no interest. The trust said all program expenses must relate to the purpose, not to private benefit. We had checks that paid for my cousin's event materials on nights that were family parties with donors as an audience. We wrote short, clear sentences that linked each fact to a rule. We added dates, amounts, and names. We did not guess at motives. Boards do not need motives to see a breach. They need straight lines from the rule to the act. Where there were repayments, we counted them. Where there were none, we left the field blank and noted it. We did not shame anyone on paper. Shame is a feeling, breach is a condition. I wrote an executive summary that a person could grasp in one read while standing in a doorway. It said, in plain words, that funds left the trust to insiders without proper approval and without proper terms, that some funds served private purposes while wearing the clothes of charity, and that records did not meet the standard the trust set. It named the remedy that the trust itself provided. Remove the current trustees and install the successor trustee who would freeze distributions, demand an accounting, and seek restitution. Our state rules gave my parents a set number of days to answer a demand to account. Nora drafted a letter that was firm and not theatrical. It said what we wanted, what rule supported it, and when the clock would run out. We served it in a way that created a clear record, certified mail with a copy by courier to the foundation office. My parents could gather their papers and answer, or they could not answer, which would make the next step simple. We planned for either path. At the same time, Nora drafted a petition for removal that would be ready the minute the cure period ended if the answer was not real. She also drafted a notice to the named corporate trustee, letting them know they might be called to step in under the clause we had found. Devon prepared short charts that any reader could understand without learning our family tree. The charts showed the outflows to my aunt and cousin, the absence of terms, and the lack of return. They were not pretty. They were clear. I chose the date for the next move with care. The donor appreciation luncheon sat on the calendar like a stage someone else had rented for me. I offered to underwrite catering so my name would be on the program, which gave me reason to be near the audio and visual crew without questions. We set the demand letter to land far enough before the luncheon that the cure period would end that very morning. If my parents answered in full, the successor trustee would explain reforms. If they did not, the removal order would be read. The foundation had already booked the hotel ballroom. I knew the room. I knew where the sound mixer sat and how the podium microphone fed the recorder. I knew where the cameras would stand because they always stood there. I called the catering manager and offered to cover the mid-course. I asked that the program say, mid-course underwritten by Jennifer Wilson. That line gave me a reason to speak with staff and to be near the systems without becoming a spectacle. 2 days before the luncheon, I walked the space with the house sound technician. I played the part of a helpful donor who wanted the event to look good. He showed me the patch from the podium to the recorder and to the house speakers. I asked for a backup lapel microphone on a second channel just in case. He shrugged and added it. I did not need to own the sound, I needed to know where it lived. I made sure the guest list included the people who could act when they heard what the successor trustee would say. That meant the president, the board chair, major donors who cared about rules, and a few local leaders who took notes when governance mattered. I did not invite the soft feature reporter. I did not need a headline. I needed a room of witnesses who would not unhear a lawful order. I looked at the draft seating map like a chessboard. I asked that the president, Ruth McAllister, be placed near the podium not to flatter her, but because proximity makes action feel natural. I asked that the board chair, Charles Everett, face center with a clear view, which the staff liked because it made photos better. I did not try to control every chair. I marked the few that mattered and left the rest alone. Control that shows itself becomes a story. I wanted only facts that moved. I asked the photographer, a woman named Alma who loves candid shots, to capture reactions during the keynote. People love the in-between moments, I said, and she agreed. I checked that the center aisle would be clear at all times for service. That helped the servers and it helped me. It meant there would be room for a person with envelopes to walk from the back to the front without bumping a chair. I confirmed the backup microphone would be live on a second channel and that the house sound would record a clean feed. I placed my aunt and cousin where the camera could see them, but not in a way that felt cruel. I did not want anyone to claim I had staged their faces for a fall. I gave Michael a seat in the first row near a side aisle. It offered a clear view of the stage and a place to stand and then sit when he realized standing would not change the rules. The room was a set now, but it did not look like one. It looked like an event ready to run on time. I asked Ruth for a brief meeting a week ahead. I brought no drama and no demands. I brought a folder with a memo and 3 exhibits. I told her I cared about the foundation's health and that I wanted her to see something before it saw her. She read in silence. She is a person who cares how things look, but even more, she cares how they are. When she finished, she asked one question, "Is this solid?" I said yes. She nodded. "Then we will act like it is." She had a board to protect. This was protection. Charles Everett is a steady man who speaks slowly. I asked him for coffee, and he suggested a bench under a tree near the library. I placed the binder between us. He read the summary and the clause. He looked up and said, "If this is true, we cannot pretend it is not." I told him the successor trustee would handle removal if breach held. He asked if the luncheon would be used. I said yes, because the donors who believed in the mission deserved to hear that the rules were stronger than habits. He agreed. I did not ask Ruth or Charles to take my side. I asked them to take the side of the paper we all claimed to honor when we printed our name on it. Their incentive was simple: protect the institution. I was not asking for a favor. I was offering a path to safety that carried a cost. They paid the cost with resolve. That was enough. The named corporate successor trustee was a bank with a good record for dull competence. Their representative was Lydia Chen, a woman with a calm, clear voice that made people tell the truth around her. Nora reached out first, then looped me in. We met in a conference room that smelled like paper and lemon cleaner. Lydia reviewed the clause, Devon's draft charts, and Nora's memo. She asked 10 questions that tested the edges. When she was satisfied, she said, "If the breach is established, we will act at once." She explained what at once meant. She would prepare letters to every custodian that held trust assets, instructing them to freeze distributions pending review. She would draft a demand for a full accounting with deadlines backed by the clause. She would prepare restitution schedules that named who owed what and how repayment could be made without crushing the trust's long-term plan. She spoke without drama. Freeze, account, repay, 3 verbs. She also said she would suspend any pending grants until the accounting was complete. We coordinated on timing. Lydia agreed to be present at the luncheon with her letters sealed and ready. She would not act until a removal order was read or consent was signed. If there was a scene, she would stay calm. If there was cooperation, she would move even faster. I liked that either path led to the same place. It meant I was not hoping for a fight. I was preparing for compliance to finally mean something. Nora suggested a litigator named Alicia Park to serve the documents and, if needed, to read the order into the microphone. Alicia had a voice that could cut through a room without shouting. We met in Nora's office with the door closed. Alicia reviewed the packet and wrote a script that matched the clause word for word. She allowed no flourish. "We read what the document says," she told me. "We do not add color." That was exactly what I wanted. Color breeds argument, plain words end it. We packed the materials into neat sets. Each envelope held the removal notice, a short index of breach exhibits, and a cover letter that explained the authority of the successor trustee. Copies for the president and the board chair were labeled with their names. A separate set of letters for custodians sat with Lydia, ready to move the moment Alicia finished. We chose where Alicia would stand during the keynote, near the audio and visual table with a clear line to the aisle. We rehearsed the timing in a steady voice. We picked a cue word my father loved to say, legacy. On legacy, Alicia would walk to the podium and say in the microphone, "Counsel for the successor trustee." If my father tried to hold the microphone, she would keep speaking. If someone tried to cut the sound, the backup microphone would be live. If the room rustled, she would keep the pace and finish the reading. After the last line, she would hand the envelopes to my parents and to the board leaders. Then Lydia would step forward, calm as stone, to deliver the freeze notices. The program opened to soft piano and a reel of smiling faces. Oversized checks floated across the screen. I stood beside the center aisle, one hand resting on a chair, the other in my pocket. Alicia and Lydia waited by the audio and visual table. To most eyes, they were just guests. A second look found the sealed envelopes in Alicia's bag and the steady calm in Lydia's shoulders. Ruth sat near the podium, angled toward the microphone. Charles faced the stage with his notebook closed, ready to open it when a fact arrived. Alma, the photographer, hovered at the edge, lens capped, timing her move. My name appeared on a slide beneath a photo of plated dishes. Underwritten by Jennifer Wilson. The words were simple. They said I helped the room run. They did not say I had also purchased clarity. The same speakers that once carried a toast would carry a clause. The house sound hissed once and settled. The podium cable ran to a small recorder, and a backup lapel microphone waited live on channel 2. If anyone pulled a plug, sound would still hold. The agenda kept time like a metronome. A video showed the park we helped rebuild. A slide thanked the volunteers. Staff smiled. Donors nodded. Pride warmed the room, the kind that forgives shortcuts because the pictures look pretty. I did not warm with it. I watched the stage and counted my breath. The moment gathered like weather, not sudden, just certain. It made my hands very still. Harold was the keynote. He stood behind the podium in his navy suit and waited for applause to thin. He smiled at the room the way a person smiles at a mirror. This was his favorite place, where words built a glow around him. Ruth and Charles sat in clean sightlines. Alma, the photographer, lifted her camera. The room held steady like a note waiting for the next chord. Everyone was in position. He began with his oldest story, a kitchen table, a plan, a family that pulled together. He spoke about hard seasons and smart choices. The sentences lined up like bricks in a wall he had always wanted the town to see. I watched his hands count, past, present, future. When he reached the line that always made him flush, he said it clear as ever. What matters, he told the room, is legacy. On that word, Alicia stepped from the audio and visual table into the aisle. She did not rush and she did not ask. She moved like a person with an appointment the room did not know it had. She reached the podium and lifted her chin to the microphone. The house sound carried her voice the same way it carried his. "Counsel for the successor trustee," she said. Heads turned. The room tilted and found a new balance. Harold kept his hand on the podium and tried to hold the smile. "We are in the middle of," he began, but Alicia continued in an even tone. "Under the Wilson Family Trust, Clause 19, upon breach of fiduciary duty or incapacity, the corporate successor trustee shall assume control, suspend distributions, and compel an accounting." No flourish, only law. She read the findings: unauthorized loans to insiders from restricted assets, off-purpose disbursements labeled as program expenses, and failures to record required approvals. Elaine rose half an inch and reached toward the microphone, but Ruth, without looking at her, set a hand on the base of the stand. "Procedure first." "Effective immediately," Alicia said. "Harold Wilson and Elaine Wilson are removed as trustees. The named corporate successor trustee is hereby installed. Notices of freeze and demand for accounting are served." She did not glance at me, and I did not need her to. Her assignment was not to give me a scene. It was to give the room a record. Alicia handed envelopes to Harold and Elaine, then to Ruth and Charles. The camera did not blink. The speakers carried the soft sound of paper sliding free. A final set went to the audio and visual table for the files. "Copies are on hand," she said. She stepped aside. The microphone stood open. The next sentence would belong to whoever honored the page. The ballroom forgot to breathe. Then noise returned in pieces: a spoon on china, a quick gasp, a chair leg scraping carpet. Elaine held the envelope like a hot pan. Harold stared at his as if the seal would open under a glare. He looked at the room the way a person looks at a wave they thought was decorative and finds that it moves with force. Michael rose halfway, then sat. Standing changes nothing when a clause is already in motion. Lorraine checked her phone. Nothing loaded. She checked again, faster. Rick frowned at a banking app that would not refresh. A donor near me murmured, "Oh," in the tone people use when a truth arrives wearing boots. Alma caught the in-between faces. Her shutter clicked on surprise, calculation, and the thin line where denial runs out of room. Ruth opened her envelope and read quickly. She lifted her eyes to Charles. He had already turned to a blank page and written the date. Lydia moved from the audio and visual table to the edge of the aisle with a neat stack of letters in both hands. She waited for Alicia to finish. When the air settled, Lydia stepped forward not to speak to the room, but to pass the custodian notices to Ruth and Charles. The letters were not dramatic, they were switches. When they flipped, accounts stopped moving. Harold tried to gather the room. "We will handle this privately," he said into the microphone, all velvet and command. His voice hit the speakers and came back thin. "This is a family matter." Lydia's reply did not need a microphone. "It is a trust matter," she said to Ruth and to Charles. "The order is effective now." The difference between family and trust sat heavy on the tables. Forks paused. Glasses hovered midair and then touched down without a sound. People who had once treated my father's tone like rule learned in 1 minute that paper can be stronger than story. The realization moved across faces the way shade moves over water. A few donors folded their programs and set them down as if folding could make the moment smaller. Staff kept still in the way trained people do when something important is happening. Michael pressed his lips together like he had questions and nowhere safe to put them. Lorraine's thumb kept tapping. Rick's easy grin was gone. I did nothing. I did not blink fast or let my mouth curve. I stayed by the aisle with my hand on the chair back and let the room count. It did not take long. The board had envelopes. The successor trustee had authority. The house sound had carried the words to every wall. There was no corner left for a different version. Alicia stepped back. Lydia finished her deliveries. Ruth placed both hands on the podium. "We will proceed according to policy," she said. She looked at donors, staff, and family. "Thank you for your patience." Then she stepped away. A small space opened on the stage. I moved into it. I did not rush. I took the microphone with 2 fingers and let my other hand rest at my side. Some faces looked relieved to see me. Some faces looked afraid I would pour gasoline on a fire. I did not make them wait. I gave the sentence I had carried since the night of the toast. "Consider this my last contribution." It landed like a door closing softly, final without noise. It gathered every unpaid hour and every swallowed word and set them down where people could feel their weight. I thanked the foundation for putting integrity first. I thanked the staff for making good work happen in rooms that were not always honest. I did not thank my parents. I did not look at them. I looked at the board because the board had work now and it needed focus. "You have what you need," I said. "Use it." No plea, no speech about family, no apology wrapped in grace. Just direction, the kind I once gave in kitchens and copy rooms, now given where it counted. I set the microphone in its cradle without a click. I stepped back to the aisle. Harold's mouth shaped a word, but no sound came. Elaine's eyes were glossy like a window that holds rain. Michael looked at me the way you look at a door that has locked from the inside. Lorraine and Rick stared at their screens as if an app could edit ink. Donors loosened their grip on the programs and placed them flat on the tablecloths. They were learning. So was I. I did not smile. I did not bow. I let the house sound carry the quiet that followed my line the same way it had carried the order. The cameras kept rolling. I had nothing left to give the lens. Power had moved. It was not on the stage and not in hands that had gripped the microphone for years. It sat in plain words. I turned toward the exit and took 3 steps, slow. Then I looked once at the room I had held together for so long and let it hold itself. The luncheon ended without music. People stood in clusters that looked like islands after the tide ran out. Voices dipped. No one wanted to say the wrong thing near a microphone that had just carried law. I walked into a service hallway that smelled like lemon cleaner and steam. I thanked staff by name and left by the back door. My phone pulsed with messages. I set it face down in my bag. One preview flashed from Michael. "Can we talk?" I did not open it. In my car, I held the wheel and breathed the kind of breath you forget when you live inside other people's needs. Inside the ballroom, Ruth called an emergency board session. She did not soothe or scold. She opened her notebook and Charles opened his. Alicia and Lydia stood by the door with their quiet papers. My parents had seats but not power. That is how realignment looks. A voice becomes a process. Freeze letters went out within the hour. Custodians replied with short notes that sounded like weather. Freeze complete. Distributions suspended. Awaiting accounting. The house sound crew wound cables. Staff stacked centerpieces. The photographer rested her camera and wrote timestamps. Harold stepped into the hallway with his tie loosened, expecting a circle to form around him. No one gathered. Elaine kept near, her smile gone. "We will handle this," he said to the air. People who once nodded at his tone watched the boardroom door instead. It did not open. I walked past them both. Elaine touched my sleeve with 2 fingers. "Jennifer," she said. I looked at her hand, then away. Silence moved between us like a narrow stream. She let go. By evening, the foundation calendar read closed session. The public posts showed safe photos and safe captions. The people who needed to know already knew. At home, I brewed tea and wrote one line in my notebook: "The room can hold itself." The next morning began with paper. Lydia sent formal notices that listed the steps. Freeze, account, repay. She requested a full accounting from my parents within a clear deadline. She scheduled a board briefing to explain repairs. Nora filed the removal documents so the reading lived in the record, not only in the room. Copies went to custodians and to counsel for my parents. Devon's charts turned into schedules of restitution. They named Lorraine, Rick, and Michael where the numbers demanded it. The schedules were not insults. They were lists. Dates, amounts, missing terms, and totals. Where money had returned, it was counted. Where it had not, the line stayed blank and the balance grew. Lorraine called Lydia in tears and promised to make it right. Lydia thanked her and asked for payments in writing. Rick sent a long email about community value. Nora replied with one line: "Please address the amounts and the dates." Michael asked if his stipends could be recast as outreach. Devon's footnote answered for him they were not. Nora met my parents with a court reporter present. She explained surcharge in calm words. When trustees fail, the law can require them to pay back losses. Harold asked for time to fix it quietly. Nora said the time for quiet ended when the clause triggered. Elaine asked if generosity would count in their favor. Nora said generosity is a feeling, accounting is a ledger. The foundation issued a policy update with no names. It required written terms for any loan, barred loans to insiders from restricted assets, and demanded timely ratification of any urgent grant. It reminded everyone that the mission was not a family hobby. Donors read it and felt steadier. Staff read it and felt safer. My standing did not depend on checks. It depended on the fact that I had protected the purpose we all printed on programs. Nora advised me to remain a beneficiary as written so I would have standing if a new breach appeared. I agreed. Standing is a tool, not a prize. The whisper network turned. A neighbor who once asked me to help out without notice began to schedule and to thank me twice. A donor who expected free labor asked how to support the general fund and add a note about governance. He called it a thank you for standards. The old story said the Wilsons were generous and I was the steady daughter who kept the train on time. The new story said the Wilsons drifted and their daughter brought them back with paper, not with noise. People who once praised my patience began to respect my edges. People who teased my precision began to copy my lists. The shift was not dramatic, it was practical. Invitations changed tone. Favors became questions about best practice. I answered when the mission was real. I declined when the ask smelled like gossip in a better suit. I did not give quotes. I did not offer a play-by-play. If someone cornered me at the market, I said, "We followed the rules, that is the story." A woman I know only by sight said, "You did a hard, right thing." I thanked her and moved on. At the gym, a man who once told me to smile more said, "Respect," and left it there. Michael's messages shifted from swagger to logistics. Do you know if the trustee will allow this school visit payment? Who do I email about the vendor hold? I sent him Lydia's contact and told him once to use email so he would have a record. He tried calling late at night, the hour when I used to pick up and solve something before morning. I let the calls ring out. He texted a line about missing me. I stared at the screen until the urge to fix him passed, then set the phone down. Love can live without rescue. It just looks different when you stop dressing it as help. Lorraine asked for coffee and closure. Her note held apologies wrapped in reasons. A sick client, a slow season, a promise that stretched. I read every word and replied with one sentence. Please direct all questions about repayment to the successor trustee. If I became the office where excuses landed, the repair would blur. She sent a last jab. Family should be flexible. I let it float past me like a leaf on water. Harold asked for a meeting off the record. I answered with a meeting that included Nora. When he heard her voice, he tried charm and then pressure. Both slid off the table. He asked why I had done this to the family. Nora said the clause and the facts had done this. He asked when I turned against him. I had not. I had turned toward the rules he signed. He looked older when he left. Elaine mailed a photo of me and Michael on a porch step with grape juice mustaches. No note. Memory tugged at me and then settled. I slipped the photo into a clear sleeve and set it in a box to sort one day that will not risk my boundary. She called twice with messages about love and forgiveness and how this would look. I did not return the calls. Love is not an eraser. Reputation is not a map. Holidays used to be staff meetings with pie. When the next one came, Elaine sent a group text with a sign-up list. I replied that I had plans. It was true. My plan was to spend the day with friends who do not budget my time without asking. Michael asked me to reconsider. I wished him a good day and turned off my phone. The sky was a plain blue. I wrote my terms on one page and taped it inside my closet. I wanted to see them each morning when I laced my shoes. They were simple. I will not fund, fix, or front for them again. I will not carry secrets that bend rules. I will answer questions that help a mission. I will not answer questions that help a story. I will keep the ledger for me now, not for anyone else. If a person asks me to do a task that belongs to them, I will say no without apology and without extra words. I kept receipts and I also began to keep another kind of record. I started a small notebook of good days I once ignored. I wrote about a morning run that felt like a clean line. I wrote about coffee with a friend who asked what I wanted and then stayed quiet long enough for me to answer. I wrote about the first Saturday when I did not plan a fundraiser in my head while folding laundry. I gave time to work that returned the favor. I joined a review group for small grants with strong records and realistic budgets. We started on time. We ended on time. We decided in the room and wrote decisions down. No photos. No speeches. I went home with the clean kind of tired that comes from a task that matters and stops where it should. My silence changed shape. It used to mean invisibility, the air I left for other people to speak. Now it meant autonomy. When I did not answer a call, it was a choice. When I did not explain a boundary, it stood anyway. I did not gloat. I did not tell the story at parties. If asked, I said, we followed the rules. People nodded. Drama is a sugar high. Integrity is a steady meal. I kept the photo in its sleeve. Some days I look at it and feel the ache of what we might have been if love in our house had been built on soft chairs instead of on my back. Most days I do not look. The box sits on a shelf. The shelf holds. The house I paid to keep whole stands, watched by a trustee who counts facts. The trust serves its purpose under eyes that do not blink at smiles. I do not need the inheritance. I never did. What I needed was to stop acting like a person who should feel grateful for crumbs after baking the bread. I bought a simple clock for my kitchen wall. It keeps quiet, clean time. When it ticks, it sounds like a room without a stage, a room where I can hear my own name and where that is enough. That is how it happened. If you have ever been written out of a story you built, tell me your version in the comments. I see them all. Say where you are listening from too, because this channel is for all of us. And if you want more family revenge stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and switch on notifications so you don't miss the next one. There's another revenge story waiting for you right here on the channel.